One summer afternoon in 1977, Emmanuel Jacques, age 12, left home to earn a few dollars shining shoes in downtown Toronto.
Come get shoeshine! Shoeshine, mister! Everybody!
Extremely cheap! Only 50 cents.
He never returned to his family and was found murdered a few days later. The city was changed forever.
Hi, I'm Dale Brazo. This area of Yonge and Dundas where I'm standing today was a very different place in the 70s. On July 28, 1977, a 12-year-old boy shining shoes at the corner vanished without a trace, and this city would change forever. At the time, I was a young reporter with the Toronto Star, and I covered the story from my newspaper. I'm of Portuguese descent, and they were Portuguese immigrants, and I could relate. I walked with the searchers when he went missing, and spoke to the family when his body was found 3 days later. This is the story of Emmanuel Jacques, the shoeshine boy. It was touted as the world's longest street, but in the 1970s, what most people knew of Yonge Street was the lively, tacky, 2-kilometer stretch between King and Bloor in downtown Toronto. The area around Yonge and Dundas was awash in porno shops, body rub parlors, and adult bookstores. The mayor then, David Crombie, called it a yawning cesspool.
In the late 60s and early 70s, that section, basically south from, I would say, Gould Street, you could pick Gerrard, but south of Gould down to Queen, almost to Queen, that few blocks was really essentially blockbusted by the sex trade from the point of view of building a healthy city. What was happening is that most people were not coming to that part of Yonge Street.
Into this quagmire walked a 12-year-old boy, wanting nothing more than to earn a few bucks shining shoes so he could feed his dog and help his family. The noise and flash of the pinball arcades and the porno shops of the Yonge Street Strip. They were a million miles from the serenity of Terceira, the picturesque island in the Azores, where Emmanuel Jacques was born and where he spent the first 9 years of his life. In 1972, Emmanuel's father, Valdemiro, like thousands of Portuguese men before him, left his family behind and came to Canada looking for a better life. He got a job as an office cleaner, and after a few years, he had earned enough money to send for his wife and 7 children. The Jacques settled in Regent Park, one of Canada's largest social assisted housing projects, home to more than 7,000 of the city's poorest citizens. The Jacques' tidy brick row house was just steps away from the local police station. Valdemiro and Maria Jacques were simple and hardworking. Their life revolved around their children and church on Sunday. Neither had a clue what was happening on Yonge Street, nor did Emmanuel, the kid with a twinkle in his eye, an angelical smile, and a zest for life. July 28, 1977 was a typical hot summer day in Toronto. A perfect day for a shoeshine boy to ply his trade. Emmanuel had been hustling shines at Yonge and Dundas for about a month now, but at 50 cents a shine, it was tough slogging. A good day netted him 10 to 20 bucks, money he turned over to his parents. But on this day, Emmanuel felt a special urgency to work. A neighbor had just given him a puppy, and Emmanuel wanted to buy food for his new pet. Shortly after 1 o'clock on this muggy Thursday afternoon, after overcoming his mother's objections, Emmanuel, his brother Luciano, and his best friend Shane McLean went to shine shoes on the Yonge Street Strip. It was a slow day.
And this guy came out, he wanted a shoeshine, and
Standing at a corner near Yonge and Dundas Emmanuel's brother Luciano and his best friend Shane McLean would later tell the story of how they were approached by a good-looking stranger carrying a pair of boots in a shopping bag.
Luciano and Emmanuel each shined one of the stranger's boots, while Shane shined his shoes.
I have some photographic equipment.
The man then offered the boys $35 an hour to help him move some photographic equipment in the neighborhood.
$35?
Emmanuel was eager to help.
Wow, that's more than I get paid in a week. That's a great idea.
But Emmanuel's brother, Luciano, sensed danger. He and Shane ran to a nearby phone booth. Luciano told his mother about the stranger's offer.
What did she say?
She said no.
The answer, she said, was no. Tell Emmanuel to come home. By the time Luciano and Shane go back to the corner, Emmanuel had disappeared. In the days after Emmanuel Jacques went missing, more than 75 police officers were on the case. Armed with a photograph of the young boy and an artist's sketch of a suspect, they knocked on hundreds of doors in downtown Toronto and searched wooded areas without success. Then, a part-time construction worker walked into a police station with a story.
I was notified by Sergeant Shillington that George Hislop, he was the leader of the homosexual community, was coming to the 51 Division on Sunday afternoon with an individual who thought he might be involved in this.
Salvatore had come to me because I knew him previously, and I think he thought I was a lawyer. And he told me that he knew something about the disappearance of Emmanuel Jacques. And I said, well, why don't you tell the police? He said, I want someone there because they'll try to pin it on me.
Worried that the police sketch of the suspect resembled him, Beresh walked into the police station with a lawyer and an alibi. Yes, he had seen Emmanuel Jacques at the corner that day. Yes, he had bought the boy a hamburger. Yes, he had been to Charlie's Angels body rub parlor. But no, he had nothing to do with the boy's disappearance.
Sergeant Tate and Sergeant Shillington were over at Charlie's Angels, and they phoned and they said they had found the boy's shirt. Now, this shirt was one that had been made by one of the storekeepers on Yonge Street, and it was the only one of its kind. And while I was talking to Sergeant Tate, I happened to look at Saul Bettish, who was sitting at a table alone, and this man became very agitated.
After 10 hours of intensive questioning, police confronted Beresh with evidence that Emmanuel, too, had been at Charlie's Angels. Then, dramatically, Beresh changed his story. Calmly, in a matter-of-fact tone, he confessed to killing the boy.
I asked him, where is the body? Where is the boy? And he said, we killed him. He's on the roof. And I've been on the job this time I'd been on the job for 30 years, and I'd never had anybody confess to me of killing anybody so relaxed and composed as this individual was.
I was very impressed, of course, by the police work. It was excellent when you come to think of it. When you come to analyze the whole thing, it could have been completely missed if it hadn't been for the police suspicion that this man who would come to the police station and make an alibi for himself being seen in this, buying the boy something in a restaurant. The police suspicion, Inspector Sproul's suspicion that he had something to do with it.
Beresh lured Emmanuel off the street. He took him to an apartment above Charlie's Angels on Yonge Street. 3 men lived in that apartment. There, the 12-year-old boy was shackled to a bed, raped and tortured over and over again for the next 12 hours.
The manner in which the boy was murdered, I found that to be extremely barbaric to my way of thinking. They first attempted to inject the boy with some type of drug with a syringe, And when they found that they weren't successful in that endeavor, they took him out into the kitchen area of this ramshackle apartment and drowned him in the sink, in the kitchen sink.
The killers tried to bury Emmanuel's body at the back of the sex shop. They couldn't. The ground was too hard. So they stuffed him into a garbage bag and dumped it on the roof of Charlie's Angels. The next day, the three men, Robert Cribbs, Joseph Woods, and Werner Gruner, boarded a CN train bound for Vancouver. Back at the home of Emmanuel Jacques, his family was frantic. Most were taking part in the search. They didn't know about the new developments. They only knew their son was missing. His confession complete, Saul Beddish was charged with first-degree murder. Then he accompanied police to the body wrap parlor, the scene of the crime. To conceal his identity, Beddish arrived at the scene wearing a brown paper bag over his head. He spent the next 2 hours reenacting the murder, posing for police photographers with various pieces of evidence. The search for Emmanuel was over. The finding of Emmanuel's body sent shockwaves through the city.
In my 50 years of crime reporting at the Star, it was, in my impression, the most horrible crime. When you think of what that poor little boy went through at the hands of these men.
It was difficult for me to fight back tears when I heard the news then, as it is even now when you reflect back. It almost seems like yesterday that this all took place, and it was bone-chilling, and how one human being could do this to another, and a child at that. Yeah. It was disgusting.
As news of the killing began to leak out, Toronto's Portuguese community erupted in grief, fear, and anger.
First and foremost, there was that explosion of feeling, a collective sense of horror and sorrow, and then a reaction to it.
I cried like a baby because all I think what happens to Emmanuel, his family, and the whole Portuguese people.
Meanwhile, acting on a tip from the Toronto homicide detectives, the Ontario Provincial Police stopped the CN train at Sioux Lookout in northern Ontario. They arrested the three men Beddish had named as his accomplices in the abduction and murder. Robert Wayne Cribbs, a lanky 29-year-old drifter nicknamed Stretcher, was heavily into sadomasochistic sex and kiddie porn. Joseph Paul Woods, 27, a former mental patient known on the streets as Crazy Joe, for his bizarre schemes to use laser beams to rob banks and shoot pigeons out of the sky. And Werner Gruner, a 29-year-old follower of the Children of God cult, whose members had been accused of sexually abusing children in communes around the world. Together with Saul Beddish, the three were about to become notorious. Shocked by the sheer brutality of this crime against an innocent boy, Torontonians came by the thousands to pray at his funeral, one of the biggest the city had seen. It was the day that Toronto wept.
I had assisted many funerals, but one like that I never had before. The church was completely full. I opened all the doors, but of course outside there were a multitude outside, and even if the church was bigger, couldn't take everybody. Was one of the funerals in which I saw so many people, and all together with the same sentiments.
Just hours earlier, thousands had lined up at the funeral home on Dundas Street to console each other and share the pain with the Jacques family. Many of the mourners were overwhelmed with grief.
As soon as I walked and I approached the coffin and I saw the body, I had the opportunity to see the body, but his mother at the time was exposing a little bit of his arms. That's when she was explaining that they even put some sort of nails in his arms, and there were all sorts of like cotton and things on his arms, and that really frightened me.
In the funeral home, they have lots of people there. The people don't stay there just walking. See the kid, you go around, you go out the another door. So when I go out, somebody came to me, asked me if I'm okay. I think I come on the bed pale or something like that. But I cry a lot when I come out. I came to my house, I cry because I'm thinking too much about that kid.
Mayor David Crombie, most of the city councilors, and the detectives who investigated Emmanuel's death were among the mourners in St. Agnes Church, saying goodbye to a kid they had never met.
There was a tremendous sense of quiet, and that quiet introduced anybody who had a bent, certainly I did, to then settle into seeing it, feeling it as spiritual. The church does that to anybody, I think, who has an interest in understanding your spirituality. Certainly for me, that's what it was.
The funeral mass over, many wept as the young pallbearers, including his brothers Luciano and Carlos, and his best friend Shane McLean, carried a small white coffin from the church.
My sister was pregnant, so when actually they were coming out of the church, she sort of fainted at that point. I started to cry and I got very emotional, and that picture of, you know, the mother grieving and the family and all the friends and relatives, it really touched my heart.
When the casket came down the stairs, I was standing in front of the church on the sidewalk, and I saw all that. My tears came to my eyes, and I didn't have the strength to go to the funeral and see the casket go down the earth, and I couldn't do it, so I went home and I stayed home.
The funeral procession was 250 cars long. It took an hour and a half to reach Holy Cross Cemetery for the final farewell to Emmanuel. Maria and Valdemir Jacques were both heavily sedated with prescription tranquilizers, their faces frozen with grief.
I followed the funeral to the cemetery. I think it was somewhere on Yonge Street, I think. We entered the cemetery. I saw many people around the casket. I remember to see the members of the family, close members like mother and father and other members. I can remember that mother lost consciousness, and someone tried to hold her, and some people pray, some people cry.
Well, the atmosphere was an atmosphere of pain. Everybody was crying. I believe that some of those was a mixture of pain, and at the same time they were upset.
In the days to come, the anger and frustration would turn to rage. But for now, the community was here to pay their last respects to one of their own. At the gravesite, Valdemir Jacques was held back by friends as he tried to throw himself on the casket as it was lowered into the ground. His wife Maria sobbed uncontrollably then fainted and had to be carried away. It was the last time their pain would be so public. Four days after the funeral, the anger that had been brewing in the Portuguese community spilled out onto the streets. There were 15,000 protesters, half of them Portuguese, led by radio personality José Rafael. They marched first to City Hall, then to Queen's Park, where they demanded justice.
I went to the City Hall. I got permission for a small parade that was supposed to be just on a sidewalk, no place else. Small parade. And I went in the radio club when I was there and asking for the people to come, and I didn't know what was going on outside. And when I opened the door to come outside to start the march, I find that I had thousands of people outside and police all over the place.
Any premeditated murder should be paid with the same thing.
For the first time in its short history in Canada, the Portuguese community had found its voice, albeit an angry one. What began as a show of solidarity with the family soon turned to rage as details emerged of the horrific suffering Emmanuel had endured at the hands of his captors.
And I was so emotional in my heart and said, well, I have to go. Because it's Emmanuel, but it can be my son.
It was like we felt hurts ourselves, our community, and like to show the justice should be done. Like whatever they did, it's something unbelievable.
The protesters vented their anger on Toronto's homosexual community. Some carried placards calling for the return of capital punishment. Some vowed to seek their own revenge. Others carried effigies of hanging men and shouted, "Death to the pigs."
The march was ugly, and they showed the people was under a revolt. Some with the scream loudly, kill him, this person should be put dead. And someone made a sign with a plywood or cardboard, imitating like someone being hanged in a rope, saying this person should be hanged.
For the first time that I was completely out of my mind with all those people, and people wanted to go to Yonge Street and break the windows of the place where the kid was found dead, and it was excitement.
The deputy mayor, Art Eggleton, appealed for calm.
The community had never come together in a single event as I saw it in this case. And that was good in some respect, but I was concerned about the anger turning into violence or a desire for revenge or bashing gay community members and things like that. So I went out to ask the crowd to be calm, that we would do all that we possibly could. The police were working very hard to deal with the issues of Yonge Street and the kind of cesspool that had occurred on the street.
From City Hall, the crowd marched to Queen's Park demanding to see Premier Bill Davis, but only a cabinet minister who was still in the building came out to speak. He promised that cabinet would discuss the cleanup of Yonge Street. After that, the people went home. The size of the protest and the volume of venom being spewed against gays had leaders of Toronto's homosexual community worried.
We had to stand up and fight back. We couldn't allow people to describe us as murderers, potential murderers, and child molesters. And that has been one of the most difficult thing that gay males have had to face is this linkage with pedophilia.
What the protests did was they were a watershed event that got the entire gay community of Toronto behind the cause, which was to defend its right to exist, and also its right to affirm that things that were being pointed at it were not necessarily true.
But the impact of the protest march went far beyond the confines of Toronto's gay community. The Portuguese were, up until the murder of Emmanuel Jacques, isolated and politically weak. The anger vented in the days following his funeral gave it a voice, which became a cry for the cleanup of Yonge Street.
Toronto really woke up to what terrible conditions existed on Yonge Street in that particular area, and there was an outcry that area had to be cleaned up.
Finally, we've got people who understand what the difficulty with Yonge Street is and that they need to move now. I promise you, we are going to move now.
We want to be able to streamline our efforts in getting
the politicians could not ignore those pleas.
Begin the whole process of how could any city let its main street decay? How could they surrender the city to body rub parlors, and was the front for prostitution and many other things? What a bad example is this for our citizens of our community? What a bad example was this for tourists that came? What a terrible example would this be for businesses that want to relocate here? So we had to find a method of cleaning it up.
Just days after the protest march, Metro Chairman Paul Godfrey hired Top Gun lawyer Morris Manning and handed him the onerous task of cleaning up the downtown Sin Strip.
It's an order of the court.
Manning took on the job with the zest of a frontier marshal, intent on running every outlaw out of his town. Using every law in the books, including bylaws from the 19th century, Manning's tactics proved highly effective.
So I had the police bring to me all of those cases where each of these establishments or their owners had been convicted of keeping a common bawdy house. And I took those cases and went to the civil court and asked for an order to close them down.
Just like that?
Just like that.
Special police squads raided sex shops up and down Yonge Street. Undercover officers launched sting operations. It was an all-out effort to drive the prostitutes, pimps, and their customers off the strip. Joseph Martin, the owner of Charlie's Angels, was arrested on 15 criminal charges. He closed it, and 6 other body rub parlors he owned or managed on the strip. Other clubs and parlors were padlocked by court order or shut down voluntarily in the face of a massive show of police force and public outrage.
In February 1978, 6 months after Emmanuel Jacques' body was found, Bettish, Cribbs, Gruner, and Woods went on trial for first-degree murder.
For all those who took part in the trial, the evidence presented in court was deeply disturbing.
It was a very intense trial, and as Justice Maloney commented at the end of the trial, he said it was a forced march through a sewer. And quite frankly, that pretty well sums it up. That's what it was.
For Justice William Arthur Maloney, the trial was the most difficult of his career. He felt he had presided over Toronto's coming of age. Maloney died in 2004, but the memory of that ordeal lingers with his family.
He would come home and think about what had happened during the day, and he said that he didn't think that I would want to hear the things that he was hearing about how the boy was killed, because it was so horrendous.
The trial lasted 7 weeks. The jury took only 2 hours to reach a verdict.
Robert Cribbs pleaded guilty to first-degree murder and received a 25-year life sentence. In 2002, Cribbs argued against his own release at a parole hearing, telling the board that he deserves to die behind bars. Deeply disturbed but declared legally sane, Saul Bettis received a life sentence with a recommendation that he never be freed. His parents testified that as a young boy, he had tried to kill them both and set fire to their house. Joseph Woods pled guilty to the reduced charge of second-degree murder and was sentenced to 18 years in prison. Evidence at the trial showed that although he wasn't in the apartment at the time the boy was killed, he took part in disposing of the body. Werner Gruner was acquitted and walked out a free man. Although he was in the apartment when Emmanuel was raped, there was no evidence directly linking him to the attacks. For the Portuguese community, the summer of 1977 remains a dark memory. The impact of Emmanuel's murder is still felt by many to this day.
Nowadays, I have to be honest, going through that experience, it's taught me that I really can't, I just don't trust anybody. And that's the main key. Now, being a mother gives me a bit of an opportunity to understand a little bit more of what his mother has gone through.
This event of the SHOESHINE Boy, Emmanuel Jacques, being murdered, this whole event on Yonge Street, for me it was like a turning point in which up until that point I felt life seems like boundless and limitless and optimistic, and suddenly this was like a big shock, a thorn, a realization that life was actually quite dangerous, possibly quite dangerous.
I still have a very hard time when I go to Yonge Street. It's very difficult for me. That image, even though I wasn't on Yonge Street and I never saw the body being removed, I have my own image, and the tragedy stayed with me. So it's very difficult for me to look at Yonge Street with the beauty that it has. I look at Yonge Street with a tragedy that many years ago stayed in my mind. So I have a very hard time going to Yonge, and actually every time I do go, Emmanuel Jacques comes to my mind.
Emmanuel's death was a wake-up call for the Portuguese. Once criticized as fractured and isolated, the Portuguese community now spoke with a unified voice, a voice that helped to develop a social and civic conscience.
The Portuguese community was not a political community, so they were not really ready for this kind of demonstration. So they were somewhat surprised in the end to see how they came together with the help of the larger community in such large numbers and voicing, their fury over what had happened to one of them. And so this certainly gave them, empowered them in a way to realize that, yes, in this country, in this society, they could achieve a great deal by organizing themselves, by demonstrating, by voicing their views, their opinions, and if necessary, as a last resort, coming to the streets and scream and do public demonstrations.
The historic protest march signaled a dramatic shift within the Portuguese leadership, opening the way to a more dynamic and powerful community.
They were hot, they were hostile, and it made the community a tighter-knit community. Because of that, a terrible tragedy had to take place that brought them together in a common cause. This common cause, although that there was not a lot, unfortunately you can't unring the bell and undo the terrible situation, it did make the community itself more homogeneous and together.
The interesting part in that demonstration was that it was a lay person that talked about it in a radio program and brought people together and organized the demonstration. So that is already a very significant change in the Portuguese leadership in the community, because in the past most of the leadership was divided. From then on, I think people started to become more involved, maybe reading more, maybe also wanting to participate more.
The march put a spotlight on the Portuguese. Suddenly, politicians became aware of a large and potentially powerful community they had previously overlooked.
The politicians knew that the Portuguese community was present in Toronto. But they didn't see it the way they supposed to, because we had no power. We couldn't elect anybody, and they didn't look at us the same way as they look at the other communities. After the parade, they see all those thousands and thousands of people, and they look at the Portuguese community completely different.
The murder may have given the Portuguese the voice they had lacked since their arrival in Canada, but the tragedy also made many look inward, leaving them feeling frightened. It shattered their illusion of Canada as a safe and benevolent haven.
There was a sense of retraction, end of delusion that Canada, Toronto the good, that we embraced so dearly as a country where we could find security and peace and democracy, if this was possible, then perhaps it wasn't what we thought it was. And the retraction almost, that perhaps later in our history is, I wouldn't say as main reason, but a contributing factor to the isolation that happened, the looking inward, the growth of clubs and associations, so that if we couldn't be safe out there, let's make our own Canada within Canada.
This isolation has been dissipating with time, and the community has continued to mature and make its presence felt in Canadian society. Yet, there still exists a memory of pain and sadness over the death of Emmanuel Jacques. That may not go away for a very long time.
The pain, the terrible sorrow felt by us as a group in face of that terrible, terrible crime. And I think to a certain extent it stayed with us for many years afterwards, and even perhaps today. And then there were other crimes that came that would revive that pain. There were pictures, there were quotes and articles and things that would revive for us and bring back the horror of that. And I think that was a terrible impact.
The impact of Emmanuel's murder went far beyond the Portuguese community. The entire city felt the pain. For many, Toronto the good had become Toronto the evil. The tragedy was the catalyst for the cleanup of Yonge Street, making the city a safer place.
Yonge Street is not the most beautiful street in Toronto. You know, Yonge Street in the area is improved dramatically. Some great new development is going in. The Eaton Centre has a street front where people can walk into the stores. It's a lot better than it was. Is the most beautiful street in Toronto? No, but it is dramatically better because those horrible body rub parlors are a thing of the past. People do not have to be confronted with it. Is the sex trade in Toronto eliminated? Obviously not. It's in different parts and it's more hidden like it is in many other cities.
Emmanuel's death was a turning point in the city's history. Suddenly, people were aware of Toronto's ethnic diversity.
I think it had a lasting impact in one sense, and that is that we came to an end of an era. It was a significant signpost in the development of understanding diversity in this city. We learned as we went along with certain historical moments how you deal with matters of not only individual loss, but deals with matters within a culture, within ethnicities that allow you to still continue on.
And it spurred the gay community into becoming more visible and to stand up for its rights.
The larger community wasn't aware that we had an organization and that people were coming out of the closet and openly saying they were gay and lesbian. This incident, the murder, propelled the gay community and myself as one of the leaders right into the foreground.
Emmanuel's death, unfortunately, did not put an end to the kidnapping and murder of children in our city. But the fallout from it gave voice to one community and pushed another into becoming more visible. And for that, Toronto is today a better city.
It happened in 1977, but the memory of Emmanuel's brutal murder remains vivid in the minds of those who can recall the events of that tragic summer. And every time a child goes missing in this city, the horror of his death is relived by many in the Portuguese community. And as tragic and senseless as his murder was, the impact of his death made us more aware, more vigilant of the dangers facing children in our society. As a result, the streets of Toronto still remain among the safest in the world. And that, perhaps, is the most fitting legacy. I, like many others, will never forget him, Emmanuel Jacques, the SHOESHINE Boy.
Now, my dear friends, the reason we are here is to commemorate the death of that young boy, Emmanuel. He was a gentle boy. He was not asking for alms. He was not robbing. He was not doing anything bad. He was just working. He was shoe-shining to make a few dollars and take them home to hand it over to his mother. So may he rest in peace.
I am here in front of your picture and I look at your face, so young and so lovely. Your last picture taken a week before your death by one of the Toronto newspapers as part of an article about shoe-shine boys on Yonge Street. Rest in peace.
It's important that we have this memorial in order to remember some of the terrible times the city went through. And after that, some of the more important times that we worked very hard to improve the quality of life and the safety in the city so other children would not have to go through the pain and suffering that Emmanuel Jacques went through at that point in time.
It is important to be here today because Emmanuel Jacques and his family need to be remembered. It's about the boy, it's about the family, it's about the city, but today it's about them.
It seems like yesterday that you were taken away from your loved ones and the ones that played with you, dearest Emmanuel. I was only 13 years of age and still remember the smile on your face each time that we played on the swings at the park. Now each time I pass by the Ryan Odette funeral home, I remember your little body all dressed in white inside the coffin that would soon be buried forever. I remember the look of pain of your parents and relatives. I remember the sadness that I felt seeing you lying there still, knowing that we would never play again. That I would never see that smile on your face anymore. These memories I share with my children so they can understand the impact your death had on their mother. Because, Emmanuel, your untimely death changed me forever. It showed me that the world can be dangerous and cruel. It taught me to be more aware of my surroundings and of the people I should trust. It made me mature so quickly. For that, Emmanuel, I thank you. I know that you are now smiling in heaven. Keep on smiling so that I can keep on remembering you the way you were. And pray for us so that we can forgive in your memory those that hurt you. I know you would want it to be done this way. Rest in peace, my friend.
He was like an angel. He's smiling, so sweet. I think that was one of the reasons that he catch the little boy.
I asked him, where is the body? Where is the boy? And he said, we killed him. He's on the roof.
I started to cry and I got very emotional, and that picture of, you know, the mother grieving and the family and all the friends and relatives, it really touched my heart.
I was concerned about the anger turning into violence or a desire for revenge or bashing gay community members and things like that.
It became apparent to me that what we needed, as I remember I called him then the hired gun, you needed someone whose sole job and sole responsibility was to clean up Yonge Street.
It was a very intense trial. And as Justice Maloney commented, at the end of the trial, he said it was a forced march through a sewer.
The pain, the terrible sorrow felt by us as a group in face of that terrible, terrible crime. And I think to a certain extent it stayed with us.
Emmanuel Jacques and his sacrifice will never be forgotten in the Portuguese community, and not only the Portuguese community, the other communities.